So Daredevil Born Again is coming out soon, and our boy John Berthel is back as the Punisher. But did you know? Back in 1989, Swedish actor Dolph Lundgren was the first actor to ever play the Punisher, but throughout the entire film there was a major problem. He doesn't wear the Punisher skull. A YouTuber by the name of Minty Comedic Arts actually explains as to why this happened.
However, it seems that the reason that the skull logo wasn't used in the movie was because director Mark Goldblatt wanted to do something different with the character.
Later on, director Mark Goldblatt was interviewed by a channel called Jap, and he actually talks more about this.
I mean, in all honesty, I wish we had retained the skull on the t-shirt. That turned a lot of people off that we didn't have that.
There's a really handy After Effects tool called Mocha Pro where you're able to track things even as they warp into form, kinda like clothing. What if we could use this to put the skull logo back into the Punisher movie where it rightfully belongs? And that's exactly what we're going to be doing in this video today. Alright, let's do this. Also, please hit that like and subscribe button for more videos like this. Thanks everyone, I appreciate it. Okay, so I'm scrolling through the entire movie to find shots good enough that I can work with, but I'm facing a lot of problems. For 80% of the whole thing, he's wearing this large overcoat that's literally covering his entire shirt. In the other 20%, I don't really have that much of an issue, but in half of that, the whole thing gets covered with this super dark red filter, and a lot of that tracking information gets lost due to how dark and noisy it becomes. So really, I'm only able to work with just 10% of the film, because it's the only parts I can realistically work with. Now the big question is, which Punisher skull am I going to use? There's been a variety of different designs to choose from over the years, either in the movies, the TV shows, and the comics, but this movie came out during the late 80s, and I want to stay true to that timeline. I don't think anyone's ever really put that to film before, except for maybe that No Mercy short film from a while back. So yeah, I'm going to be using that one instead. So here's one of the original shots I'm working on. I'm using the Mocha Pro plugin and use the mesh tool to make a surface track just on the upper torso. When that's done, I stabilize that track with a high quality warping. After that, I brought in the skull logo and used the puppet tool to adjust the layer on just one frame of the footage where it looks proportionally right. I went ahead and copied that same tracking data and pasted it on the skull layer and then set it to the same settings I put into the actual track. Now that one single image alone is mapped onto the entire shirt. Then I made a mask around the shoulder holsters and his arm to cover up the skull from clipping through. I also want to get rid of this guy from behind him. The idea here is that I want the Punisher to be the main focus, no one else should be. I took pieces of the background where these guys aren't totally covering everything and created a matte painting out of all of that to cover up the guy from behind him. I also had to make a 2D track and applied that to my matte layer so that it moves correctly along with the motion of the shot. After that, I made another mask around parts of the Punisher that got clipped through behind all the work I just did. I also ended up taking this guy out of other shots, some just tedious workflows and some just more complicated than others. All I'm really doing is taking information from the background that's either around or behind them and using that to cover up this guy. It's also a good thing that most of these shots are either just still shots or just simple dolly shots, because then I can easily just make a 2D track and use that to match the motion of the scenes, making the VFX stick in place. For some of the blood effects, I got some videos of blood splatters and mists online, then one by one added those effects onto some of these bad guys. One thing about this is, depending on how strong each of their reaction time is, that can only be how strong the blood can visually look, and I had to time them just right with the correct amount of scale or else it would have just looked weird. And now let's go ahead and take a look at it, and it looks a heck of a lot more brutal. Alright, so now I'm working on this other shot. The idea here is that I want to open up this coat as much as possible so we can see a little bit of the skull logo underneath. I went ahead and started doing a mesh track, but this time it wasn't as cut and dry as the last one was, because that police light is really blinding this shot in some frames. So I kinda had to do this a different way. Instead, what I did was I just skipped any of those frames that were bad so at least I could get a decent track out of it. Sure, some of the information is lost, but I could still make some of those corrections later. Then I used this thing called the mesh warp tool to open up the coat a bit more. I also want to be careful with how far I stretch the collar for each side. I don't want to have any overstepping issues, so I'm mostly just focusing on everything underneath to avoid from having more problems than the one I'm having now. After that, I was able to grab all the information from his shirt and expanded that going down. Then I was able to finally smack that skull logo on the shirt. I went back into my tracking data and turned all that work I just did into a source layer so that I could see what the effects would look like before I apply that same track onto my VFX later. Sometimes I do this to make sure that everything is still correct with how I made it in the timeline. After that's done, with how many times the color and the brightness changes, I had to do the same with the shirt and the coat flaps, matching the same lighting and the color to the surrounding surface changes. Okay, so I wanted to get a familiar villain from the comics into this movie too. I'm turning this guy into Jigsaw. In case you don't know who that is, he's one of the Punisher's main villains from the comics. He was also in that Punisher Warzone movie back in 2008 and in that Punisher TV series on Netflix. His face was literally smashed into broken glass in the most painful way possible. I found some stock images of Stitches and kinda like from before, all I'm doing is using the puppet tool to change the shape and direction. I used some references from the previous shows to get an idea of where I wanted to go with this. Not necessarily copying, but sort of mimicking a pattern, so to speak. I'm also adding some different bruising textures behind behind the stitches as well. I did this to add to the fact that his face is swelling and infected from the skin transplant, because technically speaking, that's not his actual skin, it's just horse hide. Now I'm working on his other shot where he's just shooting up all the bad guys in the casino. I've been dealing with this major problem. I can't track his upper body torso because of all the gun smoke that's in the way, and it's causing it to go all over the place. The mesh tracking is super sensitive when it comes to stuff like this, so here's my next plan. I made a rotor around both the coat flaps and did my best to rotoscope along the edges. It's a good thing that the outline of the coat is rapidly moving consistently, otherwise it would have been difficult to see what I was doing since this part of the footage I'm working with is super dark and noisy. Afterwards, I used a warp tool to squeeze the width of both sides of the coat flaps to really open this up a bit more. I don't really have to worry about the incorrect warping artifacts since it's constantly in movement either way. For the Punisher shirt underneath, there's pretty much no information in the sequence to choose from to fill in that gap, so what I ended up doing is I grabbed a frame from a different shot in the movie and rotoscoped the shirt out and used that to fill in the gap in that space. Then I went ahead and put the skull logo on top of that, then made some slight adjustments with the scale, the deformations, and the visibility of it all. After that, I made a 2D track on the body movement and connected it to the shirt. I added a wave effect on the shirt to match the surface tension of the coat, and then put a wiggle effect on the shirt to match the rippling look as if it was responding to the recoil of the gun going off. So now, the movements are synced together while also maintaining an offset from each other. For all the housekeeping issues, I noticed that I lost my bullet chain in the middle of editing this thing. So I ended up having to rotoscope that thing back in, and since it's moving just as rapid as everything else is, I actually had to manually do this without tracking the mask. After that, I finished this off by recreating the gunsmoke using a fractal noise layer and tried matching the same look and same speed as to how it originally looked from the movie, or at least just close enough. Alright, I am finally done with everything. I am just beyond excited to finally show this to everyone. Let's show it.
Blow out the lights.
Now let me tell you something about this Punisher. You'll find out what the word punished really means.
There's a limit to revenge. Well, I guess I haven't reached one yet.
It's been a long night till now.
This video has been on my bucket list for a while now. Remember to hit that like and subscribe button, comment your thoughts below, and see you in the next one.